outlook for the week starting March the 27th, 2017. This week I was feeling led to work with the Kipper cards, so the deck that's going to be assisting me for this week's reading is the Mystical Kipper. It is by Regula Elizabeth Fiechter. The artwork is by Trösch, and it is published by AGM. So I have the deck on hand right in front of me, so I'm going to take the cards up. We're jumping right into the reading this week. And I'm shuffling the cards. And as I do for each of my weekly general readings, I'm asking the basic and general question, what do we need to know for the week ahead? Feeling that's good, so I'm going to go ahead and cut the cards. And fan them out. And now I'm going to be picking 5 cards because I read Kipper like I do in my Lenormand reading, so I do a line of 5. So I'm looking at the fan, and I'm going to pull the 5 cards that are calling out to me and getting my attention. So now that I have the 5 cards selected, I'm going to go ahead and gather up the remainder of the deck. So I have the 5 cards face down in front of me from left to right, going in the order that I picked them. And so I'm going to start with the middle card because, like I do with my line of 5s when I'm working with Lenormand, I read the middle card as the central issue or something that we're being asked to focus on as a theme for the week possibly. So the card is bereavement. And so bereavement for me is like the coffin card in Lenormand, since I'm talking about them kind of interchangeably. The bereavement card for me represents that we're being asked to look at things that we are needing to complete or bring to an end this week, because I tend to look at bereavement as a card that represents completions and endings. It could also be a card that represents a transition, so that could be like we're transitioning from one experience or chapter of our lives, and that's going to be creating the way to the next chapter opening up. It could also represent that maybe something that we are engaging in needs to come to a halt. I remember that when I first got into reading Kipper, I learned a traditional way of reading Kipper that isn't with a line of 5 or anything like that. And in that traditional method, we would lay out the cards, and if bereavement came up, it represented that a situation that we were looking at was being halted for some reason. It was coming to a halt. So since I'm seeing that kind of imagery in my head playing out, it could represent that there may be something that we have been engaging in that we just need to kind of just halt. So it's in that regard, this card can be like taking a break or taking a pause, that kind of energy. But for me, my overall energy with bereavement is about something coming to an end, a chapter in our lives coming to an end, and that's setting the stage for the next chapter or next phase to start. Now, going with the word bereavement, it could suggest sometimes when we are experiencing change, and especially for those of us who don't handle change very well. And I can say that because I have been one of those people. I remember when I was out in the working world, I got an evaluation one time from my department manager at the time. And one of the things that she had put on my evaluation was that she was hoping that I would learn to anticipate change because I didn't handle change very well on the job. And that's understandable because I didn't handle change very well in life. So that kind of energy is not relegated to just one area of your life. I tend to look at that as an overall kind of thing. If you don't handle change, you don't handle change regardless of how it comes, and no matter what area of your life you're experiencing change in. So I say that to say this. So she told me in my evaluation that she was hoping that I would get to the point where I would anticipate change and anticipate it with the way of like being able to embrace it. And I told her, I don't know if I'm ever going to get there. So I'm saying that to say this: bereavement can come up when maybe we're moving through change, and there's a sense of loss with that. When things changed in our lives or something comes to an end, in some circumstances there is a sense of loss with that. And so if you're feeling that, or if you are experiencing that, or if you're concerned about that, bereavement is saying that's okay, but that's part of change. There is always going to be some sense of loss. It's just a varying degree of it, but you will experience it nonetheless with change. So I'm saying that bereavement is focusing on change and transitions this week, how we handle those. If we need to kind of mourn that sense of loss that comes with change, then you're being urged to go ahead and do that. I'm a big believer in acknowledging where you're at, feeling your feelings, and that will help you move through the transition much easier instead of kind of putting up resistance to it. So that is my take on bereavement. Now, Kipper, like Lenormand, is best read in combinations and pairs, so the other cards surrounding bereavement are going to give us more information about this possibility of completions, endings, transitions that we could experience. So looking at the card immediately flanking the left side of bereavement, we have living room, okay? And then on the immediate right, we have a journey, okay? Wow, this is really great. Okay, so on the left side, living room. Living room is a card that can represent a time where we are needing to look at our space. Living room for me represents personal space, right? The living room is a place where people congregate in a home, like it's a room in your home. So if you go with the idea metaphorically, you know, it's about coming within yourself, you know, closing in on yourself more closely. It's about looking at the ways that you maybe need space or how you can create space. This card is about like personal space, so it's a sense of privacy, it's about a sense of intimacy, those kinds of things. Living room for me represents an aspect of ourselves that not everyone gets to see, right? It's not like being on the outside of the house. Let's say that the house represents you, right? Metaphorically, figuratively speaking, right? So if you're the house, then people who are coming by outside the house get to see certain aspects, right? That's the outer, right? But the living room is on the inside of the house, and so there may be something going on the inside that not everybody is going to get to witness, not everybody's going to get to see, you know, not everybody else is going to experience. So going with bereavement, it's making me feel like that change and transition that I was talking about may be something of an inner nature, or it could be an experience that you are feeling like you don't need to share that with everyone. Like only the people who are really close to you or intimately connected to you are either two things, either need to know about it or going to understand it, because on some level it's a kind of shared experience, if you will. You know, not everybody gets to relate or connect or understand what it is that we're going through. So I'm going to offer that living room could be something that we're going through that either we need to keep private or keep to ourselves. It's a very inner or inward experience, or that not that many people are going to relate to it if it is a shared experience. And again, I'm looking at the visual imagery of bereavement, and here we have a group of people standing in the cemetery as the casket is being lowered into the ground and the person's being laid to rest. That whole idea about laying something to rest, it may be something that you need to do just for you, or again, if it's a shared experience, not that many people are going to be involved in that process of change. So that's living room. On the other side, we have a journey. So a journey always represents embarking on a journey or moving through a circumstance. This is a travel card, so again, the idea here, it could be literal travel, but I'm going to go with the idea with bereavement and living room coming before it. For me, it's going to feel more metaphorical. So it's about maybe our journey through life. The boat is over water, so it could be like a spiritual journey, an emotional journey, and that would make sense with what I said about bereavement and honoring how you feel about going through a cycle or a process of change. You know, if you're feeling a sense of loss with that, you may be needing to kind of navigate through those emotional waters with that. And you may be needing to look at the process of change maybe in a bigger sense of like this is a part of your spiritual journey. It's about making progression through that. It's very interesting because I talked about the idea of bereavement being like a halt card. Then this card is about movement, it's about progression, it's about advancement. So there may be a pause in whatever it is that you're trying to experience, you're trying to create, you're trying to move through. And then journey will represent at some level, at some point, it will pick up, it will move, it will progress, it will, kind of continue to move on. And it may be moving on in a different way. Maybe the way that you're going about it, needs to change. So this way you need to just maybe take a pause about the way you're going about it. And then when you do that, in that moment of taking time out, going with living room and bereavement, taking time out, maybe you'll see another way, maybe a better way for that to progress and move forward. But the journey card can just represent, like, if one chapter of my life is closing, something's opening up, so I can go about the next journey or phase of my my experience. So I'm reading that as a journey. So now I'm going to look at the outer cards. The card on the far left is military person, and on the far right we have rich girl. Now the first thing that I notice about these two cards, Kipper is a deck that has a lot of extra people cards in it. So military person and rich girl are both people cards. So now these could be aspects of, I tend to read them two ways. So this could be an aspect where another person is involved in this, or it could be an aspect of ourselves. And that's especially true with these two cards. So military person being the first card on the far left, starting out the line. So military person can represent something having to do with somebody who is actually in the military, or somebody who is a service professional. So I tend to look at this as any profession where the person in that profession has to wear some sort of uniform, because he's wearing a uniform. So it could also be too, like, the idea of the uniform symbolically for me represents like doing something the way everybody else does, right? So this card could sometimes come up when we are adopting an approach, because I talked about journey being about movement, progression, a journey. So we have chosen to adopt an approach that may be just like everybody else, because I'm seeing like the idea of something being cookie cutter, right? So it could be like we've adopted the approach like everybody does this kind of thing. And maybe that may be with bereavement in the middle of the line, saying that's where we got to draw the line, that's where we've got to make the change. Maybe we have to do something that's unique to us. It may be, again, it may be an experience that we need, or a journey that we may need to go on our own. We may not be able to take a whole lot of people with us, right? So that's one aspect of it. It could also be too, like, adopting the approach with uniform, adopting the approach where maybe we have been looking at something kind of like regimented. This card could be like, maybe we're looking at the rules, we're looking at the regulations, we're looking at things, being really disciplined, because I tend to look at the military person as somebody who's very ordered, very structured, very disciplined, and can be a little bit regimented, right? So maybe if that's the case, maybe that's an approach that may need to change, right? And maybe that's something that worked for you personally, going with the idea that living room is the closest card to military person. So it could be too, like, maybe we have a close connection to a military person, but I'm also going to suggest maybe we're looking at, creating a new form of structure, a new form of discipline, maybe a new form of regimentation or routine that's solely for us with living room. And so how do we go about that this week? The other thing with military person for me can come up when something that we are doing has become official. I tend to look at this as like official status. So could be like the cards are giving us the go ahead, like the green light, where it's about going ahead and doing it, making it an official thing that you're going to undergo whatever this process is. So again, military person could represent, adopting, this idea of uniformity, and maybe that's what needs to change. It could be like taking a look at your regimen, and maybe changing things up. Maybe you've been a little too routine. If you want to change something up, maybe it is that you need to become more disciplined about it. So that is military person. And then the card on the other end, rich girl, is a card that can represent someone younger than us. So rich girl typically can represent like a daughter. If you're watching this and you're a parent, it could represent a daughter, it could represent a cousin, it could represent a sibling, maybe a younger sibling, somebody who's younger than us. So I'm seeing that as a possibility. So it could be too, like, maybe If we go with living room, maybe possibly being a close connection or bond between an older person, a military person, somebody who has some sort of title, status, position, right? And rich girls on the other end, so it could be somebody who holds that kind of status and then a younger person. And so maybe like somebody who's taken on the role of being like an authority figure. And so we have a conflict with rules, regulations, discipline with a younger person, right? And so it's being reflected in rich girl, right? So we're taking a look at that. What do we need to change about that? You know, if we want to make progression and advancement in this relationship, what will we need to be willing to change about how we've been approaching it up to this point? Because that could be the thing that's not working, right? So I'm seeing that. The other thing about rich girl, if it's not about a particular person, the idea here with rich girl is about finding joy in life. And I love the fact that it comes after journey or a journey, because it represents being on a journey to find out what lights you up, what brings you joy in your life. I tend to look at military person as very left brain and rich girl as very right brain, because rich girl can represent creativity, and that is our right brain. So it's about like, how can we make the journey possibly from being so very left brain, you know, in terms of rules, regulations in our heads maybe, and how can we bring more creativity? How can we swing over into looking at the things that that light us up? Maybe it's about, instead of looking at things from a very disciplined, regimented, rules and regulations kind of approach, how can we bring a more creative approach at this point in our journey through life? So I'm looking at that. I'm taking a step back and looking at the line and seeing what else do I need to say about it. So again, I think I'm going to sum up. Again, we're being asked to focus on change and transitions in our lives and how we feel about those, how we move through that. That's going to be very key this week. Military person starting the line off could be an actual service-related type of person or professional. I'm looking at it more like, how can we take a look at our routines this week, our regimens, the things that we, plan our lives around. Maybe that's where the energy and the focus is coming in, about creating that sense of change. Living room is about maybe taking some time out to create space for us, and maybe that's the thing with military person. It's about like making that more of a routine. Maybe we need space, maybe we need quiet time, maybe we need time to ourselves, and we haven't gone about the work that's needed to create that in our lives, and so maybe we need to do that. I tend to look at living room too as a need for privacy, a need for space, whatever that is. I think that's a relative word. Whatever space means to you, how can you create more of that this week? Bereavement I've already touched on, so now I'm going to move on to a journey. A journey I'm thinking is about like navigating through the emotional waters this week, our spiritual journey. How are we going to progress and move through life, especially if we're embarking on change? What comes after that? If we're moving through a space where a chapter has come to an end in our lives, what's next? And how do we move about that? If we've had a difficult time, if we felt like maybe we've been in a rut, how do we get going again? Right? And then a rich girl would come in perfectly with that, because it would say, how can we find joy again? Maybe after loss, how can we find that sense of joy about life again? If we've been really overly disciplined about something, coming off as, regimented, that kind of energy, how can we change that approach and be more creative? How can we move from maybe being left brain to more right brain? How can we move from being in our head to being more in our heart space this week? And so on that note, I will end and wrap up this week's Oracle Outlook. I am James Himm Mitchell, and I am so thankful that you've shared this space here with me for this week's video reading, and I look forward to sharing this space here again with you for our next video reading together. So until then, I'm hoping that you have a wonderful day as well as a wonderful week. Take care.